Right, let's talk about today's main subject, and it is Michael O'Neill at Stoke, a manager who obviously spent many years cutting his teeth in the Scottish and Irish leagues, and then rose to fame in charge of Northern Ireland. He was appointed by Stoke at the time. Mike, Stoke were really struggling, and we're staring League One in the face. But he's turned things around, and he hasn't quite got them to the top six yet. But you have to acknowledge that in terms of a rescue job, Michael O'Neill has done what Nathan Jones was unable to do before him.
Yeah, I'd say it's a job that's very much on course in terms of what O'Neill's doing. What I would also say is that I think he's been dealt a lot better hand than either Nathan Jones or Gary Rowett before him. I think they had to do a lot of the hard yards in terms of the dressing room and where it was, after relegation. I think there's a lot of play. I think but essentially what we're talking about here is the legacy of Mark Hughes and Mark Hughes' managerial style of recruiting, individual talent, a lot of foreign players who come from different leagues and things like that. But basically, pampering to the whims of big name players. It's very much part of his managerial style, but the legacy that he leaves behind. And I think, I've heard the phrase used about Mark Hughes never having been relegated, but he's seen a fair few in the rear view mirror, because the legacy he leaves behind is this, you've got these status dynamics within a dressing room and players suddenly, who are used to being pampered and catered for. And Gary Rowett looked like a really solid appointment when he came in. You saw that team just relegated. There's no more reliable operator in the Championship than Gary Rowett at that stage. And you're just thinking, yeah, this should be a solid top six season. You put them players with him, but he had so much to deal with. In Nathan Jones as well. They're both very controlling managers and take a real hands-on approach. And the players were having none of it. And if you've got that friction and players not responding. So, I think the club's kind of reached a point where they understood they had to go back to the drawing board a little bit and award a manager a bit more time, and that these cultural dynamics had to be sorted out. And it's not necessarily Michael O'Neill's forte, but he has piece by piece managed to get, the last two transfer windows have been important in terms of him trying to phase through more of what he wants and get some of these big names out of the building.
Yeah, one of the phrases that I think he used 2 or 3 times when he first came in was change the culture at Stoke. And that goes hand in hand with what you just said there. And he spoke and he said, I looked at the dressing room. He said, it was an overinflated, a bloated squad and a mix of players from previous regimes, some who clearly didn't want to be there. And I guess, Michael O'Neill had to come in, sort the wheat from the chaff. And there's some big contracts rolling down there. Players have been shipped off to various points, but Michael O'Neill, he's a very intelligent manager, isn't he? He's a very, very erudite manager as well. He's got a degree in business. He went into the financial sector as well. He's a thoughtful, and he takes his time to think things through before making any snap decisions. And that seems like the right sort of character to try and get a handle on this dressing room.
Yeah, well, when he came in, I remember when he came in, and I remember watching a fans forum actually, pre-COVID, and it was talking, they're asking him about the culture, and you could see his body language when he said, when he walked in, what did you think of, the dressing room? And you could see him kind of recoil in his seat, and he was just like, this horrible, because he's a very logical person. He's not necessarily a people person, but he has got this aspiration to change the culture wherever he goes. And this goes back to Northern Ireland and the way that he always wanted players to want to play for Northern Ireland. He created the conditions whereby players didn't want to retire. Players didn't want to, it became this culture at Northern Ireland where players were like, oh, I don't fancy this. We've only got so many points for, less than a point per game in a qualifying group. I can't really be bothered going away for a few days. And then suddenly you've got this hamstring injury that you want to get on top of. And he changed that culture because he made it an environment that players wanted to be involved in and wanted to be part of. So there's this aspiration there to change the culture through logic, through putting the right systems and things in place to cater for players' needs in a different way. Him as a people person doesn't necessarily spot when someone's upset or needs to be cajoled or things like that. It's all about creating the environment that players want to be there and enjoy it day to day. But he is a very, very logical, very intelligent person. And I think any footballer worth the salt would listen to what he has to say and the patterns he can recognize and the way he can simplify problems for you and make your job seem so easy by just taking on board his information. And I think any player worth the salt will look at him and he commands respect in that regard, you know, in the fact that you just know that what he's got to say is valuable.
Do you have to be an intelligent player yourself to work well with that? Does he tell you the message and let you think for yourself? That's something that we've covered before on the podcast. A manager who gives a player a rough idea of what to do, but then the player has to work it out for themselves, or does he give a clear and concise message, which is you do this in this part of the pitch, and it all clicks into place? Which of the two do you think he does?
I think he's very good. I think he's very good at tailoring his message to his audience. And I think it also does require a little bit of patience on players who are a bit slower on the uptake of this kind of information or concepts that might be new to them. So this might be why, you know, Stoke, for example, this season looked like they were knocking on the door for the top 6 at one stage and couldn't break the way in. And ONeill was a little bit like, too much too soon. I don't think we're ready yet. And this might be younger players or players who were a bit slower to understand what he's asking at times. And it takes time. And we are talking about a manager, let's not forget, that lost to Luxembourg as Northern Ireland manager in his first couple of years there. You know, so it didn't go swimmingly from the beginning for him in the Northern Ireland job. But slowly but surely, these concepts will sink in and will seep into players' mindsets. And the more there's continuity of the players that he's working with, the smaller group to some extent that he's working with as well. You know, he talks about the bloated squad. As soon as he gets a number he's comfortable with and these messages can be relayed back and forth quickly, everybody's on the same page and understands all the different concepts that are being asked of them, then, I think it becomes rock solid once it settles in. I think once, these players learn these new concepts or these things that ONeill's got to say, they don't forget them once they've learned them, but it can take a while. And this, there's lots of managers of this ilk that, when success eventually comes along, it is rock solid and it's continuous and you can keep going with it. And that's basically the way I see it with Michael ONeill, is that, yeah, he's very good at tailoring his message, but I think we should not get confused with that, everything he says is gold and instantly turns to results. I think some of these things take a bit of reinforcement and repetition and stuff before eventually players really start to cotton on and live out these principles and become seriously better players for it.
What do you think made him choose Stoke then? Was it the fact that he likes a challenge? Because let's face it, if he was a man who, didn't relish an opportunity and a challenge, he probably could have had that Northern Ireland job for life.
Yeah, I'm curious about this, why he chose Stoke, actually, because the rumours had it at the time when he took the Stoke job that he had a few clubs lining up, and he could have had his pick. Now, presumably, the lure of Stoke was not necessarily the parachute payments, but the infrastructure of the club and the club's ability to put in place the infrastructure that he wants to put in place. So, in terms of walking into a culture, I can't think of a worse job that he'd want to choose. Even though, some of those contracts had been run down to some degree under Rowett and Jones, it seemed like a poor fit on that level, because culture immediately sorting the culture and people skills isn't necessarily his forte. But in terms of building the infrastructure and forward thinking, then that very much is what ONeill's good at. And I'm guessing he got guarantees about time, he got guarantees about resources to put these things in place. And with those guarantees, I think he's able to see far enough down the line to see what he's capable of. And also it's worth mentioning, I think no fans there's not many clubs can say not having fans in the ground has been a good thing. I think Michael ONeill has probably made a lot of progress that would have been tougher with fans, because I think there was a very impatient mood, very much focus on what the fans had lost in terms of Premier League football. And it'd become very much a club that any misplaced pass and things like that, the grumbles would come out very early in games. And I think it was really difficult for Stoke to play home games. And I think that has enabled that step back has enabled O'Neill to do a lot of work. I believe that potentially that, it would have been a lot more difficult under different circumstances. So yeah, it's trying to avoid the short-termism is going to be key in the next 12 months, I would imagine.
Yeah, I did some work at the 365 on games during the Gary Rowett and the Nathan Jones, and then the start of the Michael O'Neill era when fans were in, that was. And yeah, there are plenty of grumbles around the ground, but understandable given some of the performances that were served up. But Michael O'Neill doesn't seem like the sort of manager who would ever bow to fan pressure. He doesn't seem like the sort of manager who would ever really, bow to player pressure either. He seems like once he's made up his mind, that's what's happening.
Oh yeah, he's very strong in that sense. He doesn't bow to anybody. He's the only thing that dictates what Michael O'Neill does is logic and knowledge and information and the quality of that information. And he is very blunt when it comes to telling home truths, and he doesn't deliver it in such a way, he in such a way that he's trying to prove a point or that he's trying to, I'm just going to tell it as it is kind of thing. He just tells it as it is in a real sort of understated, mild-mannered way, but you see the words that he delivers sometimes, and they're very, very blunt when it's terms of analysing a performance or even an individual player's performance. He doesn't really care about too much about what his words, the impact they have emotionally on people. It's like, no, we've got to get to the bottom of what is sound knowledge here and what is the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do. And the sooner I cut through the nonsense and get to the heart of the matter, the sooner these players are going to be able to understand what it is that I'm asking and what the difference is between right and wrong.
Yeah, so he's not going to bow to fan pressure, and he's also not going to change his style for anyone. He openly admits that his preferred style is not that easy on the eye. And one thing he said when he came in to Stoke was he was asked about his philosophy, and he said, "I'm not really comfortable with that word." He said, "If I had to put my finger on a philosophy, I'd say it's just to win games."
Yeah, he is a real pragmatist, and this was I guess any new manager that comes into the game, the word philosophy gets bandied about. And, Northern Ireland had a lot of success playing a certain way that never really changed too much because they were pretty much the underdog in every game they played. So why would they change from that? And so you hear this word philosophy or this way, but he's a pragmatist. He solves logical problems in a tactical sense. And, he's able to retain a huge amount of information. When he walked, you kind of think he walked into the job as an outsider, having never managed in the English leagues before and all those years spent in international football. But what you don't necessarily realise is just how well he understands the Championship and League One from watching Northern Ireland players, how he understands the setups at the clubs. And, this is, I even think back to, he's going to League One games to watch players who are on the bench and not getting off the bench. He's Northern Ireland players, and he's gone all the way to this League One match. So then you just taking on board all this information about the two teams. And I think he's done a lot of this in the time. He's only there to watch one player, but he's been observing and understanding. I think he understands leagues at a global level. I think he's one of the managers that probably understands the Championship from top to bottom, exactly at a moment's notice. If you asked him a question about, Birmingham's defensive structure, for example, he could talk to you for 20 minutes, half an hour in real fine detail, and just understands how everything connects, what the patterns are of which teams play 3-5-2, and if there's a league-wide trend towards a certain way of pressing, then he understands the alternative counter reaction to that if he wants to be different. He's just a real pragmatist, but we shouldn't underestimate the breadth of his knowledge and just how much he pattern recognises and his ability to speculate what people might do next as well.
Do you think he prefers, or maybe not prefers, but you think he relishes the tag of underdog? We talked on last week's podcast about John Coleman and how when Accrington got into those top six positions, they didn't like it. They didn't like starting matches as the favourites. But looking at O'Neill's history, started as, assistant in Scotland and managed teams that were generally struggling and needed to be rescued, and the same in Ireland as well. Teams that were always, always looking upwards in the table. And then in Northern Ireland, of course, he was only given the job initially on a temporary basis and then made permanent when they saw what he could do. But again, as you say, any match that Northern Ireland went into, pretty much under his tenure, they were underdogs in the market. Do you think he prefers to keep it that way?
I don't think it's necessarily an underdog thing. I think it's a matter of, I think he likes to be adaptable, and I think he enjoys the changing system from week to week, which he did less and less with Northern Ireland. I think he possibly relishes this more, even though it's taken a while to get to where he wants to be. I think he just loves the challenge. I think he likes it when other teams show their hand or show enough of their hand, so then he can adapt and make life difficult for them. So in that sense, we tend to see, you can talk about active football and passive football. And active football is, about imposing your one way of playing on everybody else, or passive football, or more reactive football being reacting to what the opposition do. And I think ONeill is unashamedly a passive, reactive manager. And the more that, but we tend to associate that with underdogs, even down to Jose Mourinho as almost taking an underdog approach with a giant of a team of wanting to play on the counter-attack. So there's that association there. But I think if you tease that apart, I don't think it's the underdog thing that he fears. I think once he gets things his way, he'll quite relish being at the top of the division and expected to win every week. But they will do, I would imagine Stoke would become a team that might, struggle as red hot favourites, because that by definition means that they're meant to take the game to the opposition. But if they want to, react to the opposition rather than take the game to them, then you possibly do get this pattern that they are more of an underdog team more than a team that can be trusted as red hot favourites.
And interesting that you mentioned Jose Mourinho. Upon doing my research on Michael ONeill, he's the only manager that I saw twice mentioned by ONeill in post-match or pre-match interviews. Now, obviously, that will have been due to the fact that they played Spurs in the Cup, but talking twice, about his admiration for Jose Mourinho and the way he goes about his business. So, although there might be plenty of differences in their personality, he clearly, he clearly wants to set up in a similar style.
Yeah, I think it's pragmatism, and they are very different personalities. Well, let's say very different. They are different personality types. They use different functions, but he is a pragmatist at heart, and there's no better pragmatist to learn from than Jose Mourinho in terms of seeing what you've got at your disposal, as the resources and the players, and in O'Neill's sense, using them as tools and piecing them together as a unit that gets the best out of the attributes of those players. It doesn't surprise me at all that there's huge admiration there for what Mourinho's done. And, Mourinho has set a lot of templates for a lot of managers of how to defend or how to play in a certain way against certain teams. You go back to Inter Milan against Barcelona, and the fact that, almost giving the ball back to the opposition because you were weaker when you had possession, because you weren't in your shape, and Mourinho's developed these concepts down the years that have started from him. And so studious managers like ONeill, who want to understand the way of being able to play in different sets of circumstances in different ways, depending on conditions and different types of opposition, will have studied Mourinho in real depth to try to understand, where his knowledge comes from.
One thing he has managed to do at Stoke, and of course he didn't quite deliver playoff football, but as you said, he felt as though it might have been too soon and injuries disrupted their campaign. But he seems to have eradicated mistakes at the club. And he did talk about this actually when he first arrived. He said there were too many individual mistakes. And the same actually for Northern Ireland. The Northern Irish defence was all over the place before he came in and conceding crucial goals. And I remember, at the start of the season before ONeill came in, Jack Butland, for example, making one or two high-profile errors, Danny Bart and Tommy Smith and other players who just, who weren't particularly associated with clangers, making them on a fairly regular basis. But ONeill seems to have come in, tweaked a few things. And one thing that you really notice is that errors are now few and far between under his tutelage. And I guess that plays into what you're saying about, the logic of spotting something and finding a way to work it out.
Yeah, I think it's a step-by-step process, and I think this is why this only supports the argument for patience from the Stoke fans, because he's come in and he's vowed to deal with individual errors, and that's what he's done. And this is the information he's passing on to the players. The players first and foremost are understanding what their own roles are the next level is to understand how they connect with different parts of the team. And that's when you begin to see a more collective outfit that, you know, almost has a better sense of autopilot, can create more and do more things by the way that they connect with each other. But as a first step, the players got to cut out their own errors. They've got to cut out their own defensive mistakes. And they've become very, very tidy. Lots of clean sheets this season. And, you know, that's step one. And the hope for ONeill is that step two comes soon enough, you know, that he doesn't get into any trouble next season. Because, you know, I don't know what the mood exactly is. Like you say, nowadays it's social media that we're getting our gauge from more than, you know, what's actually going on at matches. But I am kind of getting the impression a little bit that Stoke expect to be top six by now and ONeill doesn't. And that's going to be the friction point next season, potentially. But it's up to the players to now take it from an individual level and start connecting with each other in you know, we understanding some of the principles. And these are the things that take time. It's almost like levels of abstraction. And it's getting a little bit more abstract now if Stoke want to go to another level. The concepts that the players need to understand aren't just about themselves. It's about other people and around them in the team as well.
So inevitable question then, based on what we've just talked about. 2021, 2022 campaign, there'll be plenty of expectation. I'm sure we'll see Stoke priced up and certainly tipped by some as, you know, potential outsiders for promotion this coming season. What do you reckon? ONeill to deliver this time around, or will he want to wait another season? Do you think he needs another season of building and you know, I guess collecting, you know, better players? And yeah, what do you reckon? Do you reckon he needs more time?
I think it's possibly still going to be a year too soon for ONeill in ONeill's own mind. And I think ONeill knows his own mind and he won't shy away from the truth. And some Stoke fans this season haven't presumably enjoyed hearing when they're on the cusp of the top six that we're probably not top six ready. We're just kind of, this is where we're at. And this is a good season in itself to be just hanging on the coattails of the top six for most of it. I think next season, it could be more of the same, and it could be just trying to hang in and around that top six for longer, but not necessarily finish there, and just as a building block. I think ONeill's looking further down the line, and this is where next season could be turbulent in places. You know, unless everything really clicks into gear in it. But I don't see that on the noises I'm getting so far. I think it could. I think in ONeill's own mind, he's looking at another full season, and then possibly, you know, you're looking for possibly jumping from a top half just outside the playoff type scenario into to becoming a ready-made automatic. I think once all these concepts take hold and everything just suddenly falls into place, I think there's no questions about top six. That's trivial almost. I think that you could be looking at a team that's shooting for automatic then.